Hello. Great to see you all here today. We are Global. So today we wanted to give you an update on Global's continued growth within the podcasting space. We're also going to talk you through our recent launch of our brand new and chart-topping podcast, The News Agents. We'd also like to walk you through some research we've recently run around news and current affairs podcasts. And if that wasn't enough, we're going to have Dino, Sofos and John Sopel of The News Agents on this very stage.
It's a jam-packed session.
It's jam-packed. Firstly, some introductions. So thanks to James for the intro. Just as a reminder, my name is Mike Wooler, Head of Podcast Partnerships at Global.
And I'm Sarah Ray, Head of Podcast Sales at Global. So we wanted to start off by showing you a snapshot of the growing titles across our global slate. As you know, Global's breadth of podcasting spans across all genres and reaches all pockets of UK audiences. We really do have something for everyone. So Global's podcast network includes some of UK's biggest and best-known podcast titles, and the network is essentially made up of three core pillars. So we have Global Originals, which are developed in-house by our expert podcast production teams. We have Friends of Globals, which is exclusively housed content on Global, but made by independent podcasters, such as How to Fail with Elizabeth Day. And we also work with some of the UK's biggest broadcasters and publishers, so by the likes of Sky and ITV. All in all, this gives us real breadth and scale, and no matter who it is that you're looking to target, we will have a solution for that.
That's right. And in the spirit of this being the Upfronts, we wanted to share some exciting news around our new and improved podcast commissioning team. So with Megan Wastel at the helm, we recently welcomed Chris Lander to the fold as Head of Comedy and Entertainment Podcast. Now, Chris brings with us years and years of experience as a comedy agent, and I hear it on good authority that he is behind the discovery of James Acaster and Deborah Francis White, to name but a few. Sorry, I'm just about to drop on my cards. On top of that, we also welcome another new but not so new face in Vicky Etchells, who's taken on the role of Head of Factual and News Podcasts, having been part of the leadership team at LBC for over 10 years. Now, both are going to be responsible for the commissioning and overseeing the production of high-quality, ambitious podcast projects within their respective genres, and by all accounts, they're already hitting the ground running. Just a bit of bonus news here as well for you as well. So alongside Chris and Vicky, we're also welcoming a familiar face in Chris Stark, who recently joins from the BBC to lead in the development of sport podcast content, on top of being the creative executive producer, I hope I got that right, and a presenter on Capital Breakfast with Roman Kemp. It might have been easier to list the things that he wasn't going to be doing. Chris couldn't be here today, but he did want to jump on and say a quick hello himself.
Hello everyone, it's Chris Stark. Now, I've got to say the makeup thing is because they've just got me to do some photos here. I'm definitely not going to look this fresh, I think, after a few weeks on the Breakfast Show, but it's all good. I just want to say I'm really excited to be here. So excited to get started properly next week. Creating and developing podcasts with Global Player. We're going to have a lot of fun. We're going to create some amazing moments. I'm really excited to get involved. So just want to say hi. Bye.
So thank you, Chris. So as well as investing in comedy and sports podcasts, we're also busy cementing our position within the news genre. So as the home of the first commercial news broadcaster in the UK, LBC, you might have heard of it, we're already synonymous with respected journalists and with some of the biggest names in UK broadcasting exclusive to our platforms. And just to demonstrate this, warning, another video, please take a look here at our incredible journalistic talent and how they're already fully embracing podcasting.
I am Andrew Marr, and my podcast, like my LBC show, is called With Striking Originality, Tonight with Andrew Marr.
I'm Ian Dale, and I co-present the For the Many podcast with Jackie Smith and the interview podcast Ian Dale All Talk.
My name's Katrina Ridley, and I'm the creator and host of the Rethinkers podcast. In every episode, we take an aspect of life or society that we take as standard and get a fresh perspective.
My name is Sheila Fogarty. I'm a presenter at LBC. I've made a podcast, Global Original podcast, called The Followers.
Oh, hello, I'm John Sopel. I'm a presenter of the News Agents podcast.
And I'm his co-host, presenter of the News Agents, Emily Maitlis.
And I'm Dino, the executive producer of the News Agents, and we are a daily news podcast We're out every day, Monday to Friday. We cover the big stories of the day.
I'm James O'Brien. I present the Full Disclosure podcast, which is a series of long-form interviews with fascinating people from the worlds of politics, literature and entertainment.
I'm Rachel Johnson, and I am the proud host of Rachel Johnson's Difficult Women.
Audiences like current affairs podcasts mainly because I think they trust the presenters of them. And when you find someone you trust, you want to hear more from them.
I think we're living through the most turbulent, the most fast-moving period in British politics for decades. Prime ministers rising and falling, parliamentary revolts, markets crashing, you name it. You get all of that, what it means, plus some thoroughly unexpected stories too.
Sometimes we just pick something that we think will really chime with the audience because we're trying to make this habit forming. And so far we're succeeding because we're hearing from a lot of our listeners that they're coming back to us and telling us what they'd like to hear more of and what we might have missed.
The podcast is such an intimate environment. It's completely different from a news interview where it's a quick hit. This is a sit down for half an hour with somebody who really opens up on a personal level.
The beauty, I think, of podcasting when it comes to social issues, and in the case of this one, criminal issues, is you really get the time to dig down into those issues. And I think the more you illustrate those things with human stories, the more impactful the whole thing is. And that's hopefully what people find in the followers.
Not all my interviews are every week top of the news agenda, but I like to think that every interview they give me, every interview I do with them are both timely and timeless, which is why this is such a brilliant medium.
Why is there such an appetite right now for political and current affairs podcasts? I think it's because we all need to get a grip on what's happening around us, and very few of us have the time to read or watch for hours and hours and hours. You are busy, you are interested, and you need to know what it all means.
I think the audience gets a deeper understanding of the issues that are under discussion, partly because you're talking about them in more depth and with more space. There's a wonderful example with Rory Stewart, a former Conservative MP, who was silent when I asked him a tricky question about Boris Johnson for about 10 seconds. And that span of time, that length of silence in this format feels like an age. On the radio, I would have had to hurry him up or interrupt him, but in podcast, you can leave it until he's ready to answer. And the answer was spectacular.
Growing up listening to the radio, I didn't hear many people like me of a similar background or class, but it's not only accessible to different listeners, but it's really accessible for different types of creators and putting different opinions and perspectives out there.
You get the opportunity to hear a proper story, a tale unfolds. So you find out what happened in people's cases. You find out over each episode what happened in my case. So you get that two levels really. You get the level of storytelling, which is really important, I think, in podcasting. But you also get the chance each episode to examine different elements of that story. Certainly my motivation with this podcast was for people to learn about stalking and know what to do if it happens to them.
If people discover a political current affairs podcast they like, they don't mind how long it is. Some of my For the Many podcasts with Jackie Smith, they last for up to 2 hours. I've never had a single complaint about them being too long, but they like to hear from people that they respect and like.
It was really, as Andrew Marr just said, why is there such an appetite for news and current affairs podcasts? Well, there is just so much news around.
Understatement of the century.
Whether we like it or not. So to further understand the sentiment here, Global Insight recently commissioned a piece of research. We wanted to delve a little bit deeper into the thoughts and the attitudes around the way that we consume news and news podcasts. So I'm excited to be able to share some of the headlines that we found here today. So firstly, we asked a panel of respondents what it was they actually wanted from news providers. It won't be too much of a surprise that being trustworthy, well-informed with reliable information came top of the priority list. But when we asked them how they feel about the news, the key findings were that people wanted to understand the implications and context of the news, but with expert opinions guiding them through. But it is the sheer volume of news sources out there, and that is the big issue. So all of us here, multitasking across multiple platforms, we need to find our way through the noise of the news. It's clear to see where news podcasts come into the equation. So we can listen to expert, trusted voices, but on the go. We can get behind the headlines when we're on the school run. We can even be amused or entertained along the way.
And here is just some proof of their growing popularity. Just take a look at the stats coming up on the screen here. So not only is news podcast listening growing year on year, it's also becoming more habit forming, with more people now listening to them more regularly and for longer than ever. So we can see news podcast listening is growing, but what does it offer as a medium versus more established podcast formats? So looking across the news media landscape, it's clear to see where podcasts as a source of news have a point of difference. Now, if you look at the graph here, sorry, it's really hard to crook my neck all the way back. But podcasts are the light blue line on the left of the screen. And one thing that is actually evident from this is that podcasts are not about the headlines. They leave that to traditional publishers. Instead, people are turning to news podcasts because they offer so much more, really. While fitting into our lives, they also provide in-depth analysis, and they can also provide, as Sarah said, a source of entertainment and amusement. So this is all great news, but what does it really mean for advertisers?
Well, Mike, it is good news. It is overwhelmingly positive. So news podcast listeners understand the value exchange here. They understand that advertising is what is going to keep the podcast free. Critically, and most importantly for advertisers, a huge 78% feel it reflects positively for brands. So, in summary, our research has shown that news podcasts are being used more frequently, more widely. They offer news consumers something that's both complementary but also different to the existing news landscape. Most importantly, they offer brands a quality, trusted environment with highly engaged audiences that are both understanding of and actually open to hearing from advertising of brands they might want to talk to. But listen, this was just a teaser. We will be releasing a full white paper, and if anyone wants to have the full juicy details, do get in touch afterwards. So we back ourselves here at Global, and we believe so much in the power of news podcasts that unless you are under a rock, you might have seen we released News Agents, and it just so happened to be at a time when the UK saw a new monarch and a new Prime Minister in just a space of a few days.
We were actually going to add more to that list, but we thought it was a bit too depressing for this setting.
Yeah, relatively negative. So the hosts do not struggle to find things to talk about. When we launched, all of this amazing content was supported from the very beginning by our friends at BT. They trusted Global to deliver an ambitious podcast-first sponsorship campaign. And for the first time ever, these ex-BBC journalists were heard delivering a commercial message. Here's a little sound of how it was.
This episode of The News Agents is sponsored by BT.
Do you remember those days where you actually had to wait by the phone? You literally sat around by the phone waiting for it to ring because that call was too important to miss. And
you're recollecting your childhood there.
yes, actually my adolescence, my teen years. While this was amazing and innovating, the technology is changing. Do you still use a landline for your business? Are you ready for the switch to digital?
By 2025, all phone lines will become digital, so they'll run over Wi-Fi or 4G, which means you can connect your business number to your mobile phone, so you'll no longer change your desk. Not sure where to start to get your business ready for the switch? Talk to one of the experts at BT. Search BT Business Cloud Voice, another example of how BT means business.
Last week always stays in my head. It's the amplification, though, that Global can offer across outdoor, radio, digital audio and social, that all of our podcasts have huge scales of promotional potential behind them. The News Agents was top of podcast charts within days of launch, and we saw the quickest ever growth on social media across any global podcast launch in history. So part of the success across the multiple touch points is because we created a purpose-built studio. This really does demonstrate our commitment to podcasting. So filmed exclusively for you guys today, here is the one and only Emily Maitlis to give you a little behind-the-scenes tour.
Hello folks, we thought you might like a little guided tour, a sneak peek of how and where we work. So we're going to pull back the door on News Agents HQ. If you've listened to the pod, you'll know all about News Agents HQ already, but this is what it looks like in the flesh. 3 chairs, and we've already, I'm afraid, got our set positions. This is the Sopel chair, this is the Maitlis chair, and this is the Goodall chair. And even though it's an audio recording, we've got 3 cameras here, so that whenever we have guests, we're all on camera the whole time, so we can grab little bits and pieces for social media, for interesting exchanges, for interviews with brilliant guests that we're pulling into the podcast too. And the real work goes on right here. This is the bit that I don't understand. It's the proper magic of the podcast, where you can look at the sound levels, you can get the recordings together, you can fade up, you can fade down. Do I sound like I know what I'm talking about yet? But this is where everything gets mixed. And the most critical thing about all our studios is this. Special door, we call it the patio door, completely soundproof. When that is shut, you won't hear a thing inside.
The Newsagents. This is a Global Player original podcast.
So thank you, Emily. And having watched that video a few times, I still don't understand why she was so obsessed with the door at the end. It's a great door.
It's a good door. It's a good door.
So knowing all of this that we've just covered here, how can brands access this valued audience? So we've invested in an army of expert podcast salespeople who can talk you through the various options available to brands. But just for a little whistle-stop tour, this gives a snapshot of the kind of brand integrations we can offer. So from programmatic ad buys through to full 360 brand integrations across all of Global's media channels, we can make it easier than ever. And with industry-leading targeting and measurement capabilities, we can give you also the best tools in market to measure campaign effectiveness. Now, we hinted to this earlier on. You've heard enough from us, I think. How about we welcome the real talent to the stage? Please give a warm IAB welcome to host of the Newsagents, John Sopel, more affectionately known to his friends as Soaps, and executive producer and CEO of Persophonica, Dino Sofos.
Hello. Hi. So we're going to have to leave our phone here, John, because the Home Secretary's just resigned.
Yeah. So we've just recorded our podcast. We got on the tube to come here, and Suella Braverman has been fired from the cabinet. This is why news matters at the moment. I kid you not. And we're trying to work out whether we put a new top on the podcast, whether we leave straight from here to re-record a bit, to do what we will. Anyway, strong and stable government is back. That's the most important thing to take away from this. And Liz Truss has it all under control, and we really have nothing to talk about.
So, the first bit that we were going to talk about is why a news podcast is important. I think we've just proved why. And we are seeing that huge numbers are coming to the podcast every day. I think the audience is much bigger than we expected at this stage. And that's because people just want to find out what's going on, which is understandable.
I was going to add to that. I think it's also why things are going on. So, everyone can get on their phones now if you look at them, and I'm sure there's some kind of flash alert, whatever, from whoever you get your alerts from, saying that Suella Braverman has gone. But why? What were the pressures that have led to this? She's just lost her Chancellor, and now she's lost the Home Secretary. And surely it means that the new Chancellor of the Exchequer, Jeremy Hunt, who is from a very different political wing of the Conservative Party, has come in. Suella Braverman made some really ridiculous comments yesterday in the House of Commons and called Labour Party the party of chaos, which kind of pots and kettles you might think was a rather... And I suspect that Jeremy Hunt has seen off one of the key figures. So here we are, 3.5 weeks since that mini budget, and the Prime Minister has lost her Chancellor and her Home Secretary, two of the great offices of state. And if you're doing a podcast, oh my God, is this rich material to work with?
I wish I brought my Zoom recorder, because we could have just put that out on today's episode. Round of applause for John Sopel, please.
No, shut up.
So, in terms of trust, John, I think this is really important, because people who are coming to podcasts for their news and information, or any source, they want to know that they can trust the information they're getting. And I think one of the great things about news agents is with you, with Emily Maitlis, and with Lewis, we've got 3 people who've worked in public service broadcasting. You know, you are trained, respected, experienced journalists.
I hope so. And look, I've spent my life trying to reveal what's going on and why it's going on. In news, which is what I did for 8 years in Washington as the BBC's North America editor, it was pretty straight. You'd say, this happened today, that happened today, John Sopel, BBC News, Washington. And this with a podcast, and I found this, for the BBC, we did Americast, and I would come back to the UK on leave from Washington, and I would be stopped in the street, not by people who'd seen me on the 10 o'clock news or that had heard me on the Today programme, but by people who were listening to the podcast, because you've got time to undo your shirt button and you can relax and you can take people through it in a more conversational way and draw people in so that they feel part of the conversation that you're having. And the immediacy of that and the intimacy of that was something I hadn't experienced in broadcasting before. And so, yeah, I hope we're trusted. We've all spent a long time doing jobs where we have been, whether reporting from a war zone or whether reporting on politics or me spending a lot of my life abroad, you're trying to tell people, look, this is interesting. Hold my hand, we're going to cross the road together and we're going to make this engaging. And I think that a podcast is a fabulous medium to do that.
Absolutely. And the proof of the pudding as well is that the average listen times to our podcast, people are sticking with it till the end, which is amazing. In an online BBC News article, the average read time is like 1 second or 0.5 seconds or something. People are listening to us, average listen times are like 28 minutes, which is amazing. I just want to talk a little bit, because we get asked this question all the time. We were at the BBC for years, you for a lot longer than me. Why global?
What he was trying to say is I'm a lot older than him, which is...
Why global? And I think I'll just kick off. So I run an independent production company called Persephonica. And when I came up with the idea for News Agents with Emily and John, we knew that we had to come to a media organisation who had clout, who had a news gathering operation, who had advertising and marketing. And it was very clear to us very early, having conversations with James Rear and his team, that global was the place to do that.
Look, at the BBC, it's a great organisation. I won't say a word of criticism about it, but sometimes getting decisions taken can be a little arduous. Global bought into the idea and said, how can we make this happen? What can we do to enable you to get this on air? And that was really refreshing. And there is great trust. I'm sure if we screw up, I'm sure if no one is listening, we will know about it. But people do seem to be listening. What we have from above is a mentality that is there to enable you. And it's not to control you. And I think that they don't worry sometimes about looking over their shoulders and what might the Daily Mail say or what might this one say. I think there is a kind of intellectual self-confidence that we have loved and we have relished going into the studio, not being interfered with, because that could happen a bit at the BBC, and able to make our own pitch.
Yeah, and I think the listeners are noticing that as well, and we're having lots of tweets and comments on TikTok and Instagram from people saying, it's just lovely to hear you guys kind of unleashed, is the word. I mean, you dropped an F-bomb on the podcast yesterday, and we had lots of people sort of like nearly swerving off the road. But it's sort of great to hear, kind of as I've sort of said before, you're not turning into shock jocks, but you are able to just speak your mind a little bit more. When the country's going crazy, that's really important, right?
And you know what? We can arch an eyebrow. And there are things that are, there are bits of it that, look, it's deadly serious what's happening with the government, what's happening with the economy, what's happening to your mortgages. But the shit show that we are now being dealt up on a daily basis, there are bits of it that are funny. And we're there to engage and make it entertaining, but ultimately make it informative, and that people listening think, I know something now that maybe I didn't before.
I'm now in producer mode, and we've got 5 seconds left according to the clock, but we'll push it a little bit. 2 things that I want to ask. Where do you see the podcast in 6 months' time and a year's time?
I'm conscious, Dino, that
2 years' time, probably.
I'm conscious, Dino, that we are the final act or whatever of the day, and I am all that stands between you and alcohol out there. So I really hesitate to kind of go on too long. I would love to see the visualization that Maitland spoke about in the film there. That is great, and we're going to develop that more. I would love us to be doing live shows. Maybe this is our audition for that, and probably going badly. I would love us to be doing this, but ultimately reaching a bigger audience who want to be part of the conversation about what is happening in the world, and us, hopefully trusted, reliable there to try and make sense of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's all about, Emily alluded to it earlier, habit forming. And what we've seen, we've been going for 2 months and we've already seen peaks around drive time, peaks around the following morning, and people are tweeting us going, where's the podcast if we've had to delay it for a reason at 5 o'clock? So we know we're forming habits, which, when you release a new podcast, that's really what you want to try and do. So thank you very much for listening.
Can I just say that we got before we go for the applause line, sorry, this is where I no use to be on a live stage because I just ruined his applause line.
It wasn't a good payoff.
Was that I got tweeted this morning by someone in his sleeping bag 500 meters up El Capitan, which is the sheer face of rock in the Yosemite National Park in California. And he had taken a photo with his mobile phone listening to the newsagents in Yosemite National Park when he's got his hard hat on, crampons, ropes, and all the rest of it. We welcome all listeners wherever you are, but with regard to health and safety, please stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you.
That was awesome. And we had a question earlier about what do you know about niche things you know about your audience? And that's a pretty niche thing, the side of El Capitan. I'm fascinated to know how much of what you do is scripted and how much of it is you're not winging it, obviously, but you're just having a chat and it could go anywhere.
So after a long time in broadcasting, I have a basic self-confidence that if I open my mouth, words will come out, and broadly speaking, they will form sentences. I think a lot about what I want to say and what the arguments are and how you can illustrate it and what would be an engaging way to put it. But to try and script it would sound really wooden, and I think it would. That's what a lot of conventional radio and TV is like. It feels very scripted, and I think it's really important that this is unscripted.
Yeah, I think you'll have heard a lot today about authenticity. And when a podcast is not authentic, people can smell it a mile off. So it's conversational, but sure, sometimes we go, that was really great what you just did there, but actually, have you thought about this? And that's the beauty of podcasting, which is why I prefer podcasting to radio. My background's a radio producer, is that you can just land stuff again if it didn't quite, punch the first time, or if somebody stumbles, you can redo it, or, so there's a bit of editing, but also our challenge is to get it out by 5 o'clock every day. So, it's not like a narrative podcast that you can edit for hours.
Yeah. There was some data in the first lockdown, some Amazon data about the number of people that bought studio microphones at home and started their own podcast. There is a real craft to broadcasting to be able to tell a story in 2 minutes, as you say, and sign it off with John Sopel. Is there any relearning that goes on? It's a slightly different craft. I mean, you make it sound so easy, like having a conversation, but it can't be that easy.
It's liberating. It's liberating to be away from, if you look at something that's on the 10 o'clock news, introductory script, 15 seconds, soundbite, 15 seconds, another script, piece to camera, another bit of sync, end. And it's kind of formulaic. There are different ways of reinventing it every time. And I think that the thing that Lewis, Emily, Dino and myself have in common is we're restless people. We're looking for new ways to engage all the time. And if that becomes, that's a tried and trusted formula, we will break it because we want to do something else that will push people's understanding or be a different way of communicating. So, today, for example, Liz Truss stands up in the Commons and uses a line of Peter Mandelson saying, "I'm a fighter, not a quitter." And we thought, how funny. She's borrowing from Peter Mandelson. So what do? We got Peter Mandelson to come on about what he thought of her as a tribute act. And that was just...
Great moment.
And it was a great little moment. He was at the airport about to get on a plane. So it's telephone quality. It's not... But just think of new ideas and ways of doing it.
Yeah, and I think my background before was I created Brexitcast and Newscast and Americast at the BBC. And I think now what you're seeing is actually radio is learning from podcasting. So Chris Mason, the new political editor on the Today programme a few months ago, stopped to read a text message and broke that sort of post 8:10 two-way, which is like, you can sort of hear the Today programme editor kind of going, oh, but it really works because people, their ears are trained differently now thanks to podcasting. They want authenticity. They want jeopardy. They don't want it to just be person looks down a barrel of a camera and talks at you for 5 minutes.
Last question, just heard about Suella Braverman. No doubt in the next 24 hours there's going to be other things.
I'm checking now as well.
How on earth do you make decisions on what you don't talk about? Because you're not rolling news, you're not 24 hours going like that. How do you sit in a room and you thrash it out?
We had that today, didn't we? Because there's so much news, and there were some resignations with behind the scenes people at Number 10, and we just looked at each other and went, nah.
I mean, because it was, why someone has been suspended who we've never heard of. Why is that? That's not going to be that interesting. And I'm afraid, look, there have been all sorts of topics, having lived in America for 8 years, and I see some of the stuff that's going on in the sort of inquiry into what happened on January the 6th and Donald Trump about whether I would love to be, but, we've got to go where the audience broadly wants us to be. And we ask the audience to come and tell us what they think is important.
Yeah.
And so today, for example, we said, contact us, we'll answer your questions. And it was all about the domestic political environment. Now, I want us to range wider than that. We've done stuff on Iran, we've done stuff obviously on Ukraine, but we talked about the elections in Sweden and Italy because we think they're important. But we've also, it's not got to, we're not giving medicine to people. This is, open your mouth, this is going to be good for you. If we are going to do subjects that are difficult, we'll think a long time about how do we make it engaging and relevant to people.
Absolutely. And I think what the difference between this and other news podcasts that I've produced before, I think this is a lot more accessible. And I think that's part of the ambition of this podcast is we don't want to just be making this for news junkies who are on Twitter all day. And I was back home last weekend with some friends from Sheffield and people who are not news junkies at all. And they were all saying, we love the podcast. And I was like, whoa, you're listening? They're like, yeah. And my mates are listening. And it's just a really good way to get the news. So we need to be careful not to kind of just get into kind of like policy wonk land. We want to be, look, at the end of the day, this is entertainment as well as news. It's got to be a really fun listen. And I think when you put news agents on at 5 o'clock every day, you're being entertained as well as informed.
What an amazing way to end. Give a massive hand to Dino and John.
Thank you so much.